comrades and friends, a very good morning to all of you. We are meeting after a gap of nearly 1 month. I do hope that you and your family members are in good health. I am asked to give my initial reaction to the union budget presented yesterday by Srimati Nirmala Sitharaman. And in the coming weeks, we'll try to analyze sector-wise what is the impact of this budget. The budget is not just a statement of revenues and expenditure of the central government. It is much more than that. It is an instrument to address some of the dominant concern of the times that the nation lives in. What are the dominant concerns that today we have to the Indian nation and the Indian economy? Number one, a very serious crisis of unemployment. Number two, the increasing inflation. Number three, the growing inequalities. And number four, that the decline in the private consumption expenditure. And these are the four major issues that we expected the finance minister to address in the current budget. But unfortunately, the government has not recognized any of these four issues as a concern that needs to be addressed. And when you don't recognize the concerns, naturally there cannot be any solution. And that is exactly what we find from the budget. I do hope that most of you would have gone through the fine print of the budget and would have also tried to analyze the budget from your own understanding of the situation. But the budget, which should have recognized these four concerns, unfortunately fails to recognize them. Take the case of unemployment. Perhaps after independence, we are seeing such a kind of crisis in the unemployment. Whereas as much as 30% of the youth who want the job, who want to work, are not finding the job and they are unemployed. And we can see the kind of desperation these youth have. When the railways announced the vacancies of about 35,000, 1.25 crore youth applied for the jobs. And many of them were overqualified for the jobs for which applications were invited. And this is the serious crisis of unemployment. Unemployment has already crossed 8%. And along with that unemployment, you also find the labor force participation rate continuously coming down. So we expected that the government will address this issue. Government will announce avenues for creation of new jobs. But rather than doing it, the finance minister simply said that in the next 3 or 4 years, 60 lakh jobs are going to be created. Imagine in the next 3 or 4 years, 60 lakh jobs at a time when most of the economists and the labor leaders, they have estimated that India needs 200 million jobs immediately. So this important issue of unemployment has been left unaddressed. The second issue, which is hurting the poor more than the rich, is the issue of inflation. The Reserve Bank says that ideally the inflation, that headline inflation should be around 4%. But you have seen that the wholesale price index has gone up by 12 to 14%, and the retail inflation, consumer price index, which reveals it, is touching 6% for the last several quarters. And this is having a tremendous impact on the poorer sections of the people. And more importantly, within this inflation, the food inflation, on which the poorer sections spend a large portion of their income, that inflation is high and the government does not seem to worry about it at all. We expected that the government would take concrete steps to bring down the inflation, and this could have been done by bringing down the taxes on the fuel prices. Because once the fuel prices taxes are brought down, then automatically it will have a overall impact on the entire trade and commerce. But the government has failed to do it. The third important factor which the government has overlooked in this budget is the issue of growing inequalities. The Oxfam report is known to all of us, but the tragedy is that the government rejects all reports which talk about a crisis. The government says there is no unemployment crisis, the government says there is no problem as far as inflation is concerned, and in the same way they say Oxfam report or the reports that have been brought out by various agencies do not reflect the correct position as far as inequalities are concerned. But not just the Oxfam, a number of reports have clearly brought out that the inequalities in India are tremendously increasing. The richer 1% and 10% of the population, they control as much as 65 to 70% of the national wealth, whereas the bottom 50% are left with just about 6 to 7%. And this kind of inequalities are unacceptable. We expected that the budget is going to address these inequalities, and they are going to do it with a progressive taxation. Tax the rich, raise the resources, reduce the indirect taxes so that the benefit can flow to the common people, and by taxing the rich and the super rich, revenue can be generated for other welfare schemes of the government, but the budget fails to do it. The fourth issue which the budget refuses to consider is the falling and declining personal consumption expenditure. Now you see that the private consumption expenditure today is much lower than what it was in 2019 and 20. And unless that expenditure grows, it would not be possible for the demand to be created in the economy. And it is also an accepted fact that 84% of the households, they found that their incomes have declined considerably in the last 2 years. The government has absolutely not done anything to revive their income and create a demand in the economy. We expected that the government will at least now realize and create a system of a direct cash transfer to the non-income tax paying families so that they can get some income, they come to the market, they spend, and they create a demand. but the government has not done it. Because basically, the government feels that the growth is going to take care of all the other problems. And this is the crux of the problem. This is worldwide, it is accepted that growth by itself is not going to create incomes for everybody. Growth by itself is not going to create justice and equity. And for the growth to translate into justice and equity, it is necessary that the government must intervene to act as a distributor of social and economic justice. But the government has decided to abdicate that responsibility. The government says that despite the COVID, there has been an increase in the revenues. But just let us try to analyze from where these revenues have come. The corporate sector is booming. When 84% of the people have lost their income, the corporate sector, the stock markets have been booming. And when the corporate sector has earned more than 35-40% profit, naturally they pay their tax also increases. And then the government says that there is no problem as far as the private consumption expenditure is concerned. But here is a serious problem. You find that there is an increase in spending on gold. And that gold spending cannot be done by the poorer sections of the people. It can be done only by the richer sections of the people. And then you also find that the sale of two-wheelers has stagnated. While the sale of two-wheelers has stagnated, you have a situation where there is increasing demand for luxury cars. And this very clearly indicates that where the demand is coming from. There is 1% of the richer sections, 10% of the richer sections, while the bottom 50%, 70% of the Indian population continue to suffer. So therefore, this budget does not address any basic problems of the people. When you come to it, the government has reduced expenditure on Manrega, which is the lifeline for the rural areas where the jobs are not there and there is a migration from the urban areas to the rural areas. There is a decline in the health expenditure. There is a decline in education. And we find when the government says that we are going to expand the capital expenditure, already when you go for the fine print, you say within this capital expenditure that 1 lakh crore and all, which they are going to give to the state government is factored in. That the amount of loan that they have to give as a result of the debt clearance of Air India, 51,000 crores or so, that has been factored in. So therefore, there is a deceit. You are not truthful, and therefore there is going to be a problem, and the economy, it is very difficult for the economy to come out of this crisis. Now when you look at the middle classes, there was a lot of expectation that because of the increasing inflation and reduction in the income levels because of the job losses and the income losses, the government is going to give them some concessions in the form of income tax rebate. That did not happen. As the insurance sector, we expected that the government will infuse additional capital in the general insurance companies. That do not seem to have happened. We also expected that the government would listen to some of the concerns of the insurance sector. And what was those concerns? We expected that the government would increase the income tax savings limit of ATC and have a separate ceiling for the insurance sector so that a basic need of insurance to cover the risk that can be taken care. But that did not happen. The second issue that we asked is to do away with the GST on the life insurance premium and health insurance premium. That do not seem to have happened. So insurance sector has received a raw deal from the budget. Then the government says that through this budget, we are creating a kind of roadmap for the next 25 years. Amrut Kal, yeah, but then when you are not tackling the situation of today, there is no point in saying that after 25 years you are going to live in a land of milk and honey. We do not know. Most of us are not going to be alive to see that Amrut Kal. So what we require is that the problem has to be addressed today. And that problem has not been addressed by the budget. And this budget is once again a continuation of the neoliberal policies of privatization, liberalization and globalization. And the finance minister made it clear that in the current financial year, she is going to go for the LIC IPO despite wide opposition. Two chief ministers, Hyderabad, Telangana and Andhra, they have opposed the LIC IPO. Many leading economists have opposed the LIC IPO. They say LIC is too important an institution to be privatized, and therefore they are advising the government to rethink. But the finance minister has stuck to the point, and she says in the current financial year, LIC IPO is going to see the light of the day. We are determined to oppose it, not just the LIC IPO and the stepmotherly treatment given to the insurance worker, but on the wider issue of unemployment, on the rising inequalities, on the increasing inflation, and the need to create a demand on all these issues. We need to come together, launch a powerful agitation and force the government to reorient its economic policies and to change the course right now. Otherwise, things are going to become difficult and there is going to be much more disaster the economy and the people would see. From next week onward, we will study sector-wise how the budget impacts the health, the education, then the rural development. All these issues we are going to study one by one in from next week onwards. Till then, goodbye, take care.